I am Sofia Rossatelli, and I'm the chair of the panel that's now starting. As you have read on the program, the title of this panel is The Therapeutic Function of the Arts in the Practice of Peace. The panelists we will listen to will represent different interesting aspects about this topic. At the end of the presentations, we will have a short Q&A session. So if you would like to ask something to the speakers, I recommend keeping your comments or questions for the final discussion. You could simply write them down in the chat and I will read them at the end of the panel. So let's start now with our first panelist. She is Elizabeth Gamarra from International Christian University that would talk about human security and the paradox of resilience. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Okay, can you hear me? I hope they can.
Yes.
Hear me. Okay, great. So I'll start. I think they can hear me from here, right? Yes. I think, can you hear me in the back? Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, let me just put my time really quick. Yeah, so thank you everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gamarra. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. I'll be talking about human security, kind of the paradox of resilience, and also the concept of trauma. My presentation will be mainly unpacking these three concepts in relation to one another. And just to start, human security departs from the security of the state, and the focus is more on the individual, right? The General Assembly resolution even defined human security as an approach to assist member states in identifying and addressing a widespread and cross-cutting challenges to the survival, livelihood, and dignity of the people. So it's much more of a individual approach. And resilience, on the other case, is defined more as a process in adjustment adopted by a person in face of a shock or trauma. There's a lot of great work done in 1888 by Nietzsche, who says, whatever does not kill you makes you stronger. And it is applicable to the current definition of resilience now to some extent. So to provide the context of my presentation, I'll go over these two concepts in a study that I was part of and helped write. So to begin, I think resilience emerged as a new concept. And in a lot of peace building programs, there's a lot of emphasis on kind of pushing for greater resilience and a lot of different approaches to that. The claim is that if you reach this goal, like a lot of the different goals will be accomplished for a particular initiative or effort. And it usually targets what you consider the vulnerable, right? The children or even the caregivers. So in the US, Child Protective Services, which is CPS, is actually an organization where, for instance, if a parent is reported for abuse, whatever that is defined as, then Child Protective Services has the right for the child to either be taken in or also for a caseworker to come and intervene. So this is a really interesting, very closed but important, I guess, case study to look at these two concepts much more closely, because it is looking at the vulnerable and also looking at a systems approach. So just to continue a little bit. So yeah, this raised the idea of what is maybe a traumatic experience, and looking at from a quantitative and qualitative kind of aspect to this study. It tries to unpack this orthodoxy question of if pushing for resilience is the best way to help people achieve a lasting sense of human security or not, and how could we rethink it or reconceptualize it. So just to give you a bit of more context, saying we want resilience is pretty broad, and I think we should look at it much more closely because it could actually be disconnected by what this really means for the particular people involved, for the caregivers, for instance. So resilience could have you could say a negative or positive aspect. and providing context to that is extremely important. So there we go. So we asked the question in this study. It was a quantitative, it was with more than 100 caregivers and 20 qualitative interviews that were an hour long. And one of the questions we asked them was, what was something you experienced and went through that you thought was traumatic for your child? And how do you think this affected them, and in what ways? And there were a lot of different responses, just to give you a bit of the methods in that slide. But there were 20 selected parents for the interview, and out of 316 people who completed the survey, there were 176 people out of 316 who completed the survey, which was more than 50%. It was around 55%. So the data was great. But let me just go next. Yes, but in this process, the findings were, I think, really interesting, because I'm just going to read some of the quotes. When a parent was asked about this, the first parent said, and I'm going to quote, when this question was asked, she said, quote, "She used to go up and talk to anybody that would talk to her. Now she's kind of sits in the corner and observes people. She seems very hesitant about being with people now," end of quote. So that's the first kind of concept of how maybe a traumatic experience affected a child. But the second way of also looking at this, when another parent was interviewed, was, and I'm going to quote, it says, when we first got him out of there, he was just this little ball and we didn't know what to do. Now he is a year and a half later, it's a complete 180 shift. He talks, he's very open and very intelligent, and he's actually more, how do I say this? He's more fully developed mentally at his age than other people were. So end of quote. So in these, for example, these two interviews, there was a trend in many of these kind of findings, and kind of shows you the two sides of how a caregiver could interpret a traumatic event. And so I think this raises great questions for what this concept is and how it is related to human security at a much more deeper level, by really helping us understand about, I'm going to skip a little bit, by really helping us understand how it could even relate to international relations a bit more closely. So there are different approaches to resilience. In psychology, for instance, resilience refers to the capacity of an individual to adapt positively after a traumatic event. Criminologists, including social workers, actually try to stay away from that understanding, and they look more at how it is a dynamic process of its positive adaptation to the face of adversity. Geographers also talk about this concept as an ecosystem that can cope with a change of state, return to previous state, or maintain its function. And international relations has also gained a new perspective, or a greater one. It's been applied to, you could say, economic liberalization, labor market, also in the forms of conflict after certain individuals go through a conflict. You could say a national or global scale, kind of the idea of that country coming out of it and being more resilient is something that we see a lot in literature. So Michel Lamont published a book, it's a really great book, titled Social Resilience in a Neoliberal Era. And it talks about the consequences of neoliberalism for a social, economic, and political life and how to strengthen it. It also argues that resilience could be a product contemporary to neoliberalism and constitutes a strategy permitting states to eradicate responsibility in crisis. So I think so the reason I tell you this is because when we bring in concepts, for example, looking at this community of CPS, Child Protective Services, how the caregivers interpret it, also the current literature on resilience and human security, and also maybe try to apply this framework of what we see here, we can come up and really talk about maybe larger concepts. For example, in the study, like this event, from the study, there were a couple observations that I think were very critical, and that I think could enrich this conversation and take it a bit more further. For example, voices like in this community, Spanish speaking and English speaking individuals were interviewed. And you could say that even parents who were able to recall upon these, you could say, traumatic experiences, they also incorporated their own experience, so it became not just one event, became two, and it merged, which talks about maybe the separation of what we consider even our own resilience among the other, and conceptualize it into one. The other finding that I thought was really interesting is how suffering and thriving can coexist, right? So, and as peace building models could expand upon these coexisting frameworks and systems, I think we could think about larger ways to understand this. And also, one thing is how trauma could also build onto one another, right? So after a traumatic event, even though, for example, a traumatic experience was reported to Child Protective Services, and that was on record, how the parent or the caregiver, not necessarily parent, because it could be a caregiver in general, saw this opportunity or experience as not related, you know, whether maybe it was physical abuse, but for them, it was this like little other event that led to the larger event. So these are just some observations, I think some parallels that we can draw upon these larger concepts. And I think when we think about human security, when we think about resilience, and we think about larger systems and apply it to children, specifically their well-being, I think we could reconceptualize many of these already established concepts and apply the international relations framework a little bit more. I think maybe I talked too fast, but I think I'm done with the presentation. Thank you so much. And then the paper could actually explain to you a bit more closely about the findings. But I tried to keep it as less technical as possible and more broad. But that is all I have to share. Thank you very much. Sorry,
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your presentation. Maybe we could add something in the Q&A session about what you've just said. Thank you again. Let's turn the floor now over to Gianluca Bonanno for IPSO, International Peace and Sustainability Organization. We'll talk about the therapeutic function of martial arts. It's your time to speak.
Thank you, Sofia. Sorry, I was muted. Okay, for those of you listening in, it's still my face. And in my parallel life, I also teach martial arts. And combining it with the human development projects and work that I've been doing in different countries around the world, I have tried to a little bit elaborate more on the theoretical issues that Elizabeth has just explained to us, resilience in particular, relation with children and trauma, and how to deal with the two things and combine them in a positive and constructive way. And I've come about wonderful people, colleagues, expert martial artists, and we have put up different programs to help disadvantaged people around the world through martial arts. So address their resilience, their way to deal with different kinds of trauma, and different ways to integrate in different communities through martial arts. I will share my screen. Give me a sec. There you go. Do you see it full? Do you see it full screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So the title is Martial Arts and Post-Conflict. Wait a second again. Post-conflict trauma therapy. So using the art of war to create peace. Now, if we look at the Japanese origin of the term martial arts, it actually means, broadly translated, the way to curb excessive force. So to avoid the use of excessive force. And it may seem counterintuitive that martial arts, supposedly designed to attack and defend, could evolve into a peaceful path of creating harmony, health, and well-being. Traditional martial arts, and I will be strictly speaking about traditional martial arts and not modern fight sports, are a perfect example that the motivation behind our every action has the power to both create and destroy. And this is valid not only for what we do in martial arts, of course, but for what we do in our daily lives action. Now, we all have a general idea of the benefits of martial arts, and some of them are, well, they increase physical fitness, they decrease stress, they build a sense of community and spiritual awareness, increase mental clarity, provide a foundation for self-defense, quality of sleep, etc., 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 range of motion, balance, and tranquility while supporting cognitive function. Now, there is a tremendous amount of violence in our world, on televisions, virtually anywhere, in films and video games, newspapers, magazines, and every social network, most recently, where violence is often portrayed as a heroic cultural ideal, and fighting is depicted as the honorable solution to conflict. Now, today, people, especially in our world, anywhere in the world, people are not only fighting other countries in military wars. That is more of a thing of the past. Now, they're fighting at home. They're fighting in all sorts of circumstances, in schools and communities, outside grocery shops and restaurants, buses, public transportation, recently places of worship in a steadily fashion, unfortunately, and on public streets. And the reason behind this increase in violence that we see in our daily lives is that some people see others as different. And if we increase the interaction with different people, we increase this feeling of fear against something that is different, and then might pose a threat to us. Now, the way to understand what prevents peace is to question what creates conflict in the first place, and then learn ways on how to resolve it in a non-violent way. And some of the qualities that can be trained and practiced through martial arts can give us a few answers to this question. And we can think of respect, we can think of voluntary self-discipline and self-control, self-awareness, or the awareness of one's actual possibility to cause harm, which is something that too often is taken for granted. And sense of order that comes from understanding fear, dealing with fear inside of us, healthy competition to bring out the best of each person and not to cause harm to the opponent, healthy limits of aggression, healthy social values such as humility and integrity. Now, where and how in this debate can traditional martial arts be used as therapy? And I'll give you a few examples of what we've been doing around the world. And one of the examples is to use them in refugee camps. The reasons behind it are quite simple and quite clear, especially in the last decades. There are currently nearly 20 million refugees worldwide, and many millions more displaced internally or seeking asylum. If these persons were combined as a nation, it would be the world's 24th largest country. Now, many refugees are in poor physical, mental health. They often have very, very little to do. And half of the global refugees are either children or teenagers. So these are the pictures of some projects we had in Jordan. There's refugees coming from Syria. And it is extremely important to see that these kids are smiling and they have a purpose in life when they take part in martial arts practice. You can see that they're all dressed the same. So there is no division there in who is a little bit poorer or a little bit richer, or there is different degrees. There are different belts with different colors, which give them different position in the hierarchy of this group, depending on what they can deliver and what they can do, and not simply about their age or other social categories that we tend to keep in mind when we talk to people. For example, if they're older than us, if they come from other ethnicities, or if they work and they're our bosses, for example, right? This is a set of other pictures that we took in our projects that we had in Rwanda. Again, refugees, usually, unfortunately, in Rwanda, they're a little bit older in age, because kids, sadly, don't really make it to the refugees camps most of the times. But again, this gives not only to children, but also to adults a way to convey their emotions into a more structured and self-controlled way. This is a kids competition that we had in South Sudan, where instead the number of kids in the refugee camp is huge. And kids again get a lot of inspiration for doing something that is totally new and that does not belong to their culture, especially when they are coming from a war that's tended to divide two groups of people, because they had two ethnic groups, for example, because they had very sharp differences. Right. And what we do in refugees camps is that, for example, we take together people from different ethnicities and come in from different places and different backgrounds to train together. So it's a way to create this. Then they go back to their own communities inside the camp, but when they train, they are together. So they form bonds. They go beyond the virtual boundaries of their communities. Something similar we've been doing, for example, in Indonesia, which is another country with a tremendously high number of refugees coming from different parts of Asia and within Indonesia because of its particular geographical composition and history. Another example besides refugees camps where we can train people with different abilities and they can get benefit from training martial arts is rehabilitation centers around the world. So that means that we can use martial arts as therapy not only in developing countries or where the situation is in dire straits and we have very, very visible difficult conditions, but even next door. And especially when we promote inclusion and better access to martial arts for people with disabilities, because even in developed countries, when it comes to being physically active or practicing martial arts, which from the outside can look a little bit complicated, people with disabilities are often marginalized. They're excluded or even discriminated against. So not only do they have to break barriers in society, but often also in their own minds. The great variety of martial arts, we do karate, jiu-jitsu, but I have friends that are like this master here is doing taekwondo. So there's lots of martial arts, traditional martial arts coming, especially from Asia, but not only from Asia, makes them particularly useful for persons with disabilities. And these are the pictures, these pictures were taken in England, in the UK, where some colleagues of mine have been teaching for many years to people with psychophysical disabilities. And then the benefits they can get is that they can focus on, depending on the disability, as we may call it, they have different benefits. And I will get into that a little bit later on in the presentation. Another group that we've been working with and where the practice of martial arts can really bring tangible benefits is orphans, because you give them a sense of belonging and another way to convey their internal hatred and their internal instability, because usually, especially for those orphans who have been abandoned at a later age, So martial arts in general can give those who train the opportunity to understand oneself. This is the general idea behind it. And in understanding oneself in a quintessential way, the person comes in direct contact with the origin of conflict. So the foundation of violence within yourself. And this coming into contact with oneself is the primary reason why people study and there's really passionate in practicing martial arts, traditional martial arts, in a more serious and continuous way, as opposed to fighting sports, for example. Now, the intelligent practice of these arts is also an ethical approach to conflict resolution, in that it can be an effective way to avoid harmful aggression by developing the confidence to neutralize hostility by non-belligerent alternative means, but non-violent means. So how can, in a particular case, martial arts help treat trauma survivors? Now, when trauma survivors' fight or flight responses negate the freeze response, an effective treatment must be formulated to restore their innate yet overwhelmed physical responses to stress. This is a little bit put in difficult terms, but it means that trauma survivors usually have internal barriers that do not allow them to get their natural responses to be deployed, so to speak, and to react with the external world in a healthy way. So this freeze response is a deep-seated reaction to predatory beings or threatening emotional stresses. Trauma victims can become locked into an internal system, a closed system of unresponse, rendering their internal defenses void, as I said. So for survivors who are not effectively treated with talk therapy alone, martial arts practice can become the crux of their recovery, can help them. It's not a substitute to therapy, but can help them. And when trauma survivors get back in touch with the fight impulse in their body in a very grounded, calm, and mindful way, they can start to feel that it's safe for them to fight, for their own rights, for example, and for their position in society again. And that fight training, that controlled fight training, is coming up through their body, so they don't have to analyze it in their minds. But then that through the body, it gets to feed the brain and impact the neuroplasticity. Now, those with PTSD or complex PTSD saw a reduction of, for example, in anxiety and panic attacks and headaches through a continued practice of martial arts. Martial arts can help sufferers set boundaries through self-discipline and reestablish the mind-body connection with repetitive movements. And this common effect, given through the mind-body connection, can help trauma survivors and PTSD, complex PTSD sufferers relax and improve their sleeplessness, for example. Managing these symptoms altogether can improve the overall health of well-being of sufferers and encouraging a more positive outlook that can resonate through all areas of their life, and they can come back to society, come back out in society, and have a healthy life, benefit society writ large. Now, martial arts values, and I'm done with it, with this last slide, are a concentrate of those desired by the entire society as a whole. And these are the pursuit of enjoyment in the first place, self-improvement, perseverance, moral values, physical prowess, and respect for others. Now, in very practical terms, and to connect it to a wider understanding of society and what this conference has also talked about in the different sessions, teaching martial arts to disadvantaged persons in general helps them integrating back into society. Especially if we think of the case of refugees, for example, these are not in a politically correct definition, but they're alienated individuals who oftentimes are offered new homes in new places, and they have to move to different communities with different set of rules, with different languages, beliefs, religious beliefs, social beliefs. It's another worldview to them, connecting to the keynote at the beginning of this conference. And everybody, any one of us, needs a worldview to survive and to be not only creative, but supportive to the society he or she lives in. So, for example, these refugees, when they go to the new homes, will have an immediate access to a safe social network, in this case, the local martial arts club, while those with black belts with a little bit more experience will have a marketable skill that they will be able to teach and contribute to society with. So in this sense, even martial arts, traditional martial arts, can be used as a peace building therapy, as a tool to increase peace building and to bring the peace building discourse to a more individual level. And that can be used anywhere in the world, as I briefly explained in this presentation, and for which the benefits and using society in different aspects of society is still being developed and is still being thought about at different levels. We are trying to do that as an NGO, but there are other people who are setting up ateliers and workshops exactly for this purpose. And I will leave that for the discussion afterwards in case you might have any questions. Thank you from Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you, Gianluca, for your presentation. We have already one question in the chat, but we will read it after the other presentations. Okay. So let's yield the floor to the next presenters. There are Gianni Cipriani and Lorenzo Antichi for Sheer Dynamic Music Therapy Association, who will present to us their activity in music therapy. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So, music therapy is a profession developed in various countries around the world over the past 6 years from a variety of professional disciplines. Therefore, the definition of music therapy varies depending on the theoretical perspective or between different cultures. Behind being a discipline between art, science, and human field makes it particularly rich in terms of context that are constantly being updated. Music therapy can be considered a form of psychotherapy that uses sound and music as the primary means to establish a relationship. Thanks to the research, it is possible to foster an approach based on scientific evidence. In this sense, even though it is part of the art therapist, music therapy process research can show the quality of music relationship between the music therapist and the patient. This is possible due to the decoding of the music score. This is an example of music score. On the next slide, we will see a short video where the patient actively participates by playing an instrument. Free improvisation is a technique used in music therapy where we use a structured sound linked to sessions, context, and events in the here and now. In this video, we can see how the music therapy improvised at the piano with the sound that the child with the autistic disorder produce most casually and absently while he is looking out the window. The construction of a music framework will allow the child to feel in contact with the intra and interpersonal world. At one point, he turns and looks at the music therapy. Therefore, he has the opportunity to construct shared experience mediated by music. We have seen in the previous slide the various areas in which music therapy is most applied. One of these applications is the neonatal intensive care in the hospital setting. Preterm birth is associated with severely affective deprivation and sensory and physical hyperstimulation that predict negative outcomes. Parents often feel a sense of guilt, anxieties about the infant's future and distress. Okay.
So we will talk now about an intervention that we call premature triadic music therapy, or PTMT, for reducing the distress experienced by the triad during the hospitalization in a neonatal ward. The triad is composed by the premature baby, the mother and the father. In our study, we wanted to test if PTMT could reduce infants and parents' distress. So medical staff measured the infants' physiological indicators of distress that were heart rate, blood perfusion, and oxygen saturation level at the beginning, in the middle, and the end of the intervention. We have used Edinburgh postnatal depression scale in its Italian version for evaluating parents' distress level at the pre and post intervention. Before the start of the intervention, music therapist measured the noise level of the room with a smartphone app. If at any time noise exceeded 60 decibels, the screen lighted up to warn a music therapist, and he explained to parents that sounds would have to be monitored by this technology. Next, the music therapist established a relationship with the parents, explaining what he expected from them during the sessions. He reassured parents when they were anxious about performing, saying that the session was a moment to interact with their baby. And finally, the therapist and parents sat around the baby's thermal cradle or cot, and the session started. So this is a short video of premature triadic music therapy session.
In my opinion, this image is a good example for seeing how the co-structured music experience facilitates a relational space where each person is supported both emotionally and musically by the other.
So instruments were guitar, ocean drums, xylophone, and voice. And only music therapists played the guitar, and the other instruments didn't require musical training. Inspiring to creative music therapy by Asbeck, the therapist changed the rhythm and intensity of the music depending on the child's responses. For instance, speeding it up if the baby was more active, or slowing it down when the child was relaxed. In addition, the therapist tried to attenuate the noises of the environment, integrating them in the melody. And the parents adapted the improvised music to the physiological rhythm of the child and to the musical rhythm of the music therapist. If both parents were present, the music therapist and the father play one of the three instruments to improvise a melody while the mother sang. If only one parent was present, the music therapist played an instrument and the parent sang, holding the child in the arms. If both parents were absent during the intervention, the child remained lying down. Session ranging between 3 and 5, while the length of each session was between 15 and 25 minutes. Regarding the feasibility, staff did not consider PT-MT an intrusive intervention, and it can also take place in a room in the presence of other children. In fact, infants did not show signs of distress during the sessions. More than half of the parents were interested, and they reported they were satisfied. One negative point is that the instrumentation is expensive. The results show that there were significant differences in all three physiological indexes across the three time periods for the infants at pre, during, and after PT-MT. No significant differences were found for parents. However, the medians decreases post-test. Based on our preliminary results, we suggest that future studies on music therapy effectiveness on preterm infants should include larger samples of children and parents, using the measurement of hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, including cultural groups, and evaluating if public institutions would like to give funds for the research. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you very much, Gianni and Lorenzo. It was a clear presentation, and also the videos were very clear. So I would like now to share my screen because I'm the next presenter. And I would like to talk to you about the Art Therapeutic Atelier as a peaceful and persevering promoter of free expression. And that will refer to the exemplary commitment of two case studies near Milan, our Spazio Vita Atelier and the Blue. So after introducing my research aim, I will sum up the Art Therapeutic Atelier's main characteristics, and then I will show to you Spazio Vita's activities and its commitment during COVID-19. Then I will do the same with the second case study before moving to conclusions. So the aim of this presentation is to show to you the case study success, and by means of it, to highlight the importance of similar organizations and of universal therapeutic potential of art. But which are the characteristics of these organizations? Firstly, we have to consider the physical characteristics about the setting. There has to be provided of running water, light, natural if possible, spaciousness, privacy, and furnitures. We have to consider the chairs, the tables, of course, but also protective materials for the floors. And then we have to refer to the materials, the artistic materials, that have to allow the patients to look for experimentation and also for communication, especially through symbolism. Even if I've talked about the atelier physical characteristics at first, they are not the most important. They are instead the non-physical ones. We have to consider dynamism. It allows the atelier to meet the various needs of every patient. Then the atelier have to be very empathic. In particular, the person who runs the atelier has to be empathic. This difficult concept can be summed up in a quote, but that to be alone in the presence of another. This means that the patients have to feel completely free to express themselves, so quite alone. But at the same time, they have to be recognized and welcomed by the other. This can surely help them to give new meaning to their life. In the atelier, there's no prejudice. Instead, the therapists have to recognize the beauty of imperfection on a side and the potentiality of nothingness on the other. Let's think about, for example, the patients that for weeks or months can't draw anything on the white papers. We have to wait for them, not to judge them, of course. And then the ateliers can encourage, should encourage, the development of the main functions of the arts. There are the identifying function and the therapeutic function. Talking about the identifying function of art, we can say that the artistic creations produced in the atelier allow each patient to find or to really discover his or her own identity, up to that moment clouded by the stigma of his or of her physical or mental discomfort. After having acquired the greatest self-confidence by means of art, the individual starts to play a new role also in the community or in the society to which he or she belongs. The individual is recognized in his or her identity and appreciated as he or she is. It's therefore evident that the identifying function of creative process is essential for both the individual and the community. While talking about the therapeutic function of art, we have to say that art can bring the patients from their disease to the flow. And with the term disease, I would like to refer to Xolda's and Kleinman definition that includes illness. That's the condition, the suffering condition as felt by the patient. The disease, that's the medical, the clinical definition. And the sickness, that's the condition as perceived by the society and sometimes, unfortunately, as judged by the society. Well, all of these can be transformed into flow. And with the term flow, I refer to Csikszentmihalyi's definition that stands for cognitive, emotional, and motivational spheres work harmoniously and responding to the demands of the internal and external worlds. We are in a state of flow, for example, when we feel a balance between our skills and the tasks that are required to us. Let's now talk about the two case studies. The first is Spazio Vita. Spazio Vita is a part of a multifunctional center that has been created by the social cooperative Spazio Vita Niguarda in 2013 and inaugurated 2 years later. It's situated next to the spinal unit of Niguarda Hospital in Milan, and it's led today by Donatella Barbuglio, that's the woman you can see on the right side of this slide. And this atelier is dedicated to patients with motor disabilities. Let's now see some examples of patients and of their creations. In here, you can see some beautiful canvas and a man that created them just with the use of 4 fingers of his left hand, because he's tetraplegic. With the same little movements, he also created these artistic little objects. During this, in the months, he started to perceive himself as able to create something, even something beautiful, as you can see, not just as a disabled person. And the same happened to this woman, that's tetraplegic too, that creates these canvases, these huge canvases, just with the use of 1 finger of her left hand. They are the symbol, these canvases are the symbol of an attempt to go beyond our physical limits. Spazio Vita has been very active during COVID-19. As most of you would know, at the beginning of 2020, Italy was under a severe lockdown, so the atelier has been closed. And this is the reason why from February to July 2020, Donatella Barbuglio just gave some little assignments to her patients, like this one. So to express their everyday feelings, just painting on this calendar. But as it was possible, they went back, they all went back to the atelier again, and a new project has been started. It's called the Hug Project. In a period in which social distancing was the main rule to keep in mind, and everyone was in need of a hug, this project allowed the patients of the atelier to express themselves on the side and to receive that hugs on the other. They decorated these pillows, these beautiful pillows. These are some of the artists that participated to this project, and they are all tetraplegic. So we have seen that this atelier is mainly dedicated to the therapeutic function of the arts, while the next one is mainly dedicated to the identifying function of the art. Also, the Blue was born in 2013, but it is a branch of the Department of Mental Health of Medignano Martesano Hospital, near Milan again. It's today led by Professor Giorgio Bedoni with the collaboration of the art therapist Simone Olivieri. And Blue is instead dedicated to psychiatric patients. Over the years, the atelier has become a reference point in the Italian and also in the international outsider art scene. Let's see some examples of the artists of the Blue that have become famous in recent years. The first is Maurizio Zappone. He is a self-taught artist and a volcanologist. As you can see, his favorite subjects are volcans, and these are some serial representations. On the first line, you can see representations of Etna, that's the volcano of Sicily. And on the second line, on the left side, Stromboli, on the right side, Vesuvio, and in the center, a kind of volcan inspired by the Japanese flag that he called the Japanese volcan. For the subjects he likes to represent, he's called naturalist visionary and atmospherical designer. and is the representative of Art Brut in his profound attempt to creatively express his illness beyond the limits of medical diagnosis. The graphic representation of his disease made him, until that moment socially stigmatized as sick, regain his own dignity. The second example is instead Stefano Zangiacomi. He was born in 1984 and is now an Italian outsider artist. As you can see, his favorite subjects are men and faces, of course, the human being and the otherness. The faces you have just seen are not models, but personal recollection of seen faces. He always used huge canvases that are placed vertically on easels, and sometimes the canvases in process are two at the same time, as if to establish a dialogue between the subjects. He's in constant search for new visual and tactile sensations, for example, by means of an untreated canvases and of use of sand, he reproduced the texture of the skin of the subjects. Also, the Blue has been very active during COVID-19, also thanks to the temporary transfer of the atelier. The catalog you can see on the right side of this slide has been created during the pandemic and is called Riders on the Storm 2020-2021. And I will now show to you some examples of artistic productions that are included in this catalog, created by the same artists I've already talked about. So here you can see Zap's creations, the same volcans, so Etna here, and Stromboli. And then we have some examples by so new faces. As you can perceive, the colors are very, very vivid and bright. These artworks are very colorful because they are the symbol of the artist to say there, I exist in such a difficult period. So in conclusion, although hindered by COVID-19, the case study's incontrovertible success in therapeutic efficacy by means of cultural production clearly shows the importance of the global promotion of similar organizations and the universal therapeutic potential of art in all of its forms. Thank you. Thank you for listening. So let's now move to the last presenter of our panel. That's Chrysoula Plakioti for the Margherita Atelier of Fine Arts, who will talk about another example of important art therapeutic center. Please, Chrysoula, it's your time to speak.
Good morning, everybody. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you, Sofia, for inviting me to this conference. I'm Chrysoula, and I'm really, really happy to watch Sofia's presentations because in Atelier di Blu was my internship some years ago, and I saw some workshops of Stefano, of Stefano, how he involved, and I'm very happy for that. Thank you so much. So I'm an art therapist based in Athens, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about art therapy and present you the work of Margherita's Atelier that we started last September. So let me share my screen. Okay. So what is art therapy? Actually, I would like to talk to you about. Art therapy or art as a therapy is an artistic process where the individual is encouraged to express emotions through the artistic experience and get in contact with self in a creative and indirect approach. The art therapist is not interested in the aesthetic result or the interpretation of the artwork or images of the individual. The main purpose is to help him to change and grow personally through the use of art materials inside a safe context. So now I would like to tell you a little bit about art therapy versus art psychotherapy. There is a distinctive difference between them. Art therapy works on the symbolic aspect of the artistic expression and production, and it focuses in the well-being that comes from just being in contact with the materials and finding pleasure from just doing something with your hands and body during the artistic experience. This is a therapeutic process, but not therapy. Art psychotherapy instead uses the art as a medium to help the individual express, identify, and process emotion that can arise and then put them into words and get into interpretation. So art therapy and interests. That's why it doesn't require purpose, focus on the personal expression and pleasure from the artistic process, not on the aesthetic result of the artwork. Art therapy can be remarkably beneficial where verbal communication is difficult. Art can be a great method to facilitate the individual to express and communicate hidden or difficult emotions or thoughts. Words and emotions are transformed into images, and the artwork becomes a mirror of the individual's inner work. So where art therapy is applied to? An art therapy program can take place directly in the field, such as in hospitals, prisons, schools, community centers, etc., usually in a structured short-term form, depending on the group needs, or can be applied to the art therapist's open studio, where the therapeutic process has no specific time limit and no specific art approach. Art therapy techniques and materials vary and can be combined depending on the need and preferences of the individual. Main art practices include drawing, sculpting, collaging, photography, video, and body movement. The artistic activity and therapy involves and mobilizes the human body as it demands movement and participation, facilitates the spontaneous and authentical expression and communication, which becomes the starting point in order to experience emotion and explore various and complex aspects of the individual's identity. So the artistic activity can empower the individual through the artistic process, transforming the victim into a hero. Art therapy aims to help individuals experience and process difficult emotional issues which can be hidden or repelled, achieving emotional release and improving general well-being. So this is some things, basic points about art therapy. And now I would like to present you Vocational Center Margarita, where I work since September last year. And during COVID, we never closed the atelier. We were working on all year. So Vocational Training Center Margarita was established in 1978, and now it's in his 5th decade of its journey, and decided to introduce art to its daily life and identity. They approach art because it is knowledge, expression, detection of inclinations, therapy, cultivation of imagination, creativity, but also potential professional career for people with intellectual disabilities. Being in contact with art helps the beneficiaries to feel free and to get over boundaries. They experience art as a great exercise of freedom, which is a necessary condition for self-determination and the autonomy of people with intellectual disabilities. So in Margarita, there are 2 departments. There is an educational department where they do narration as a method that brings people together to share information, examples, and attitudes that are beneficial to their life. And then there is a professional department where also theater and atelier takes place. And they also have weaving and silkscreen workshops where they enhance the artistic production of Margarita. So about the theater vocation workshop, in collaboration with pioneer European theater organizations such as Blue Apple Theater, Hinks Theater, who offer the opportunity to share their experience and get valuable mentoring. They develop gradually and include following courses such as acting, improvisation, radio, speech training, music, kinesiology, mask, dance, etc. So the Margarita troupe after 2016, was upgraded and systematically worked harder. In 2018, the troupe conducted a performance at the Municipal Theatre of Piraeus. It was an adaptation of Cavafis's poems, The Was, in a complete production of 1 hour with original music, costumes, and lighting. Here you can see some photos from the theater, which is really famous here in Athens. Now, except the theater, we have also a gallery in the center of Athens, which is called 13 square meters, because it's really small. Was inaugurated in 2018 at the Municipal Market of Kypseli, where our artists can exhibit their artworks, and some silkscreen and weaving materials. So now let's pass to the Atelier of Visual Arts, which we started in September 2020 under the auspices of the Greek Ministry of Culture and Sports. It is based on methodologies and good practices of pioneer organizations in Europe that follow the standards of outsider art as Atelier di Blu that we saw earlier. This is the space of the Atelier where I work with 10 people, more or less, with intellectual disabilities, and they have all this space and time to experiment with different materials that we provide them. And each day, for 2 hours, they can come to the atelier and just freely choose which material they want to use. And they try to express their artistic interests, and the goal is actually to find an artistic identity. So as I said earlier, we are based on the standards of outsider art, which is the art of the marginalized, as founded by Jean Dubuffet, part of which is the art of people with developmental disabilities, a form of art that highlights the expressive power of the fragile words. It has now been established as an area of contemporary art and has entered the cultural market. And Greece's absence for this international movement, and Margarita's Atelier is the first atelier following these standards for people with intellectual disabilities. So in Atelier, as I told you, we have also education in art history through visualized material. We train the in basic principles of visual arts and techniques. They get familiar with a range of materials. And we have this safe place with artistic atmosphere and stimulant time for exercise and exploring their inner creativity. These are some artworks that were produced in this year by a beneficial. So our goals are to get these people that are mostly in their homes and they go only to the center to get social included through art, to receive confidence, to get their autonomies and strength, to complete their personality, and of course, obtain professional rights and recognition. And the ultimate goal is to open up the outsider art field, of course, in Greece. So on this October, we had the first exhibition of the artworks, which was called First Harvest, and took place at the gallery that Margarita has. And we presented a selection of artworks, which has been running for over a year. It was a really great chance for the audience to meet the work of upcoming artists who began their artistic journey and aim the equity, personal growth, and freedom. These are the photos of the exhibition where, as you can see, many people came, and these two are some artists in front of their artworks. And to conclude, last year there was a conference in December on 2020. They include Art Dialogue of Paths for Artistic Equity, which was focused on a dialogue and exchange of ideas and good practices in issues of creativity and inclusion of artists with intellectual disabilities. The panel was consisted of important organizations from England, Wales, Germany, Belgium, France, and Ireland, and it attracted a large audience from Greece and many countries of the world. The theme was originally provocative. It was about liberating breath of artistic creation of people with intellectual disabilities and ways to achieve inclusion through art, the art of people with disabilities in the public sphere. And the audience was worldwide, of course, except from the Greek experts of the field and the representative of cultural institutions. Participated as well, audience from Spain, Portugal, etc. So to conclude, we can say that Margarita Artistic is a holistic and innovative design in progress, of course, and is already part of the identity of the organization alongside the autonomy and environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chrysoula, for your presentation. Thank you all the presenters. I would like to briefly wrap up the key points of what we had just listened to, because all the presentation had several things in common. So as is evident from all the presentation we have listened to, the focus of such research is the promotion of human security and of physical and mental well-being, even by means of new forms of therapy, perhaps less orthodox, as we have seen, but which certainly have a more inclusive character. In fact, as they are intended for users, patients of all ages, social backgrounds, and cultural origins, both children, even infants, and adults. These are therapies that can certainly elevate peace. That's the aim of this conference. So, starting from the question we have already in the chat, I now invite the audience, as well as the panelists, to ask questions or to make any comments about the topics we have talked about. So the first question is for Gianni, that asked, can martial arts be seen as a form of human security and or resilience?
Okay, so I think that's a question for me. Yes, of course. Well, I don't know if all of you listening are familiar with the term resilience, but very general definition is the capacity of the human being to recover quickly from difficulties, let's say so, of different kinds. And yes, of course, because as I said, it depends from the starting point. Say in refugees camps, for example, for what we have witnessed, it is much quicker, depending on how long the children and the adults, especially the adults, have been staying in the refugee camps. So absolutely yes. I wouldn't say that works in the same way for all the situations that we have encountered on the way with our projects. But it definitely, there is not a single case where the human being that was practicing martial arts did not benefit from it in terms of human resilience. So in terms of the capacity for him or her to recover more quickly than without practicing martial arts. So yeah, that would definitely be a yes.
Thank you. If there's no other question. I just have some curiosities for Gianni and Lorenzo. So I have two little questions. The first is, how important is musical improvisation in your work? And the second, so you could answer freely after, do you think that music therapy on premature babies can predispose the children to a kind of greater music sensitivity in their development?
Yeah, thank you for questions. And now I use my best translator and answer in Italian language. Allora, la libera improvvisazione è una tecnica usata principalmente in un approccio psicodinamico e si basa su alcuni principi che fondano la relazione madre-bambino.
Psychodynamic free improvisation is based on mother-child relationship principles.
Nell'interazione diadica di madre-bambino non c'è uno scopo educativo, didattico, ma un'interazione spontanea e non strutturata che si svolge sul livello degli affetti e della loro condivisione.
There is not an educational aim in mother-infant interaction, but it is spontaneous, unstructured, and it comprises the emotional sharing.
Questo permette di co-costruire un'esperienza preverbale, prelinguistica, in cui non conta soltanto cosa si dice, non conta solo la parola, ma ciò che vi sta sotto, cioè la parola stessa tenta a volte invano di veicolare qualcosa che non viene appreso. Di conseguenza quello che è importante è la condivisione degli affetti in una relazione.
This leads to a pre-linguistic experience where words are not important and where non-verbal and paraverbal language share a meaning that words can vehicular. Is it clear?
Yeah, thank you. And
For the second.
yeah.
Ok, varie ricerche in tutto il mondo dimostrano come il bambino venga al mondo già come un essere musicale.
So the child born as a musical human being, and I had that playing music to preterm infants could be considered as a form of sensory nurturing.
Per esempio, sa riconoscere le canzoni che la mamma le cantava o le faceva ascoltare quando ancora era nel grembo materno.
For instance, children can recognize the songs that their mothers sang while they were pregnant.
Il battere ternario del cuore, il gorgoglio della digestione, la respirazione, immergono il bambino in un bagno sonoro, ecco, si può dire. Dal quinto mese il bambino è in grado di riconoscere e discriminare i suoni dell'esterno, per esempio la voce del padre da quella della madre, e con lo sviluppo cerebrale è stato dimostrato come diverse aree del cervello sono associate sia al linguaggio che alla musica.
So from the 5th month of pregnancy, the baby is able to recognize and discriminate the sounds, such as the voice of the father or the voice of the mother, and different areas of the brain are associated with both language and music.
Questo per dire che sicuramente la musica può essere di aiuto per lo sviluppo generale del bambino, ma soprattutto per offrirgli quel senso di riconoscimento affettivo di cui ha bisogno per la crescita.
Surely, music can help the general development of the children and satisfy the emotional recognition needs. I would like to add that music induces changes in the brain areas involved in emotional processing. This might be explained by the fact that the auditory cortex is connected to cortical areas that process emotions of joy or fear, such as the limbic and paralimbic areas. Therefore, the synchronization of movements to the rhythm of the music might be associated with the expression of positive emotions, the activation of the anterior hippocampus, the release of endogenous opioids, an increase in oxytocin levels, and a modification of the activity of the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And finally, this means that music could change the synaptic plasticity of neurons belonging to the limbic and paralimbic areas, which are responsible for emotional processing, and they are involved in cognitive and sensomotor processing.
Thank you for the answer. I'm very impressed, in particular thinking about the fact that we are musical human beings since our first month of pregnancy, so it's incredible. So now, if you, the audience or the other speakers have other questions, it's your time to write them down or to speak.
I don't know if you're getting questions from the audience. I will. It's a general question to all of you and all of us, in the sense that, for example, I use martial arts as therapy, but the end part of martial arts is usually already coded. So we do forms, etc. So there is not much space left for individuality, so to speak. Whereas with music, and you have improvisation, with art also you have different colors, different shapes. What I'm curious about is if there are, I don't know, are there any patterns that we can recognize in terms of if you leave your patients totally free to do what they want, if they're given a stimulus, can we see some patterns depending on what the stimulus was? Because if we can see some patterns, it's probably easier for us to come up with some solutions to give therapies to particular patterns. Even I don't know if probably with CPS, if you had some data collected saying, okay, we have these cases, we have 10 cases of a particular situation, and we come up with the same patterns. I don't know, it's just a curiosity.
Can I have my question? Okay, and my question would be, when it comes to therapy and music therapy, is there like a framework you'd recommend for example, people struggling with alcohol and drugs? Because I think with for example, intensive outpatient programs, when people are going through recovery, music therapy is definitely an item, but I think it's only, I think, one, and then they combine it with many other types, you know? So it's like supplementary. So do you think it would be more worth it perhaps to go more like deeper into the promise of music therapy, instead of maybe combining it with other models? Like they have one with like horse therapy, they have grass therapy, they have like different ropes course, which they connected to therapeutic notions. So I'm curious if you think it should maybe go deeper or maybe broader and if it could be supplemental with other notions. I hope that makes sense. I should take my mask off, sorry. So those are two questions, I guess.
Before giving the floor to the other presenters, I just would like to try to answer, even if I'm not an art therapist, neither a music therapist. I don't think that's possible to recognize patterns inside ateliers or music therapy environments. But the most important thing we have to consider is the collective aspect, is the fact that the artist can affect the other artists with the creations. So it's not the fact that there is a pattern, like a code, but maybe the same patients with the same condition sometimes produce the same thing, but it's not always like that, instead of the martial arts that are codified. And about the question made by Elizabeth, I think that going deeper in music therapy could be interesting, especially if we consider that music therapy is quite immediate instead of other kind of psychotherapies. As Gianni and Lorenzo tried to say before, they use music therapy as any kind of linguistic, so any kind of relation mediated by the words. Instead, sometimes it happens in art therapeutic ateliers and so on. So I think that going deeper could be interesting, but if they want to add something, they could do it.
Yeah, so we would like to add that music therapy is a complementary therapy to others. And we have to work in multidisciplinary equipes. For example, Gianni works in prisons with a psychologist. And in fact, he is a music therapist, while I am a psychologist. And music therapy is often associated with other psychotherapy, for example, cognitive behavior therapy or psychodynamic psychotherapy or kangaroo therapy. Also for kangaroo therapy is made with music therapy in the hospital for premature infants. And there are also research studies that show that the outcomes are better when music therapy is made with other psychotherapists respect to music therapy alone. So we want to foster a complementary approach to satisfy the needs of patients in a best way that we can.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Chrysoula, if you want to add something in particular about the fact that if you have recognized patterns inside of the artistic atelier among the patients.
Yes, I would like also to agree with you, Sofia and Gianni, about the supplementary thing that not only art therapy and music therapy can stand alone, okay? So you need to be in cooperations with psychotherapists and other therapists to have an holistic approach to an individual. Regarding the patterns, I'm not sure why we are talking about patterns as an aesthetic result? Because, for example, I saw in Atelier di Blu, a person without autism can produce an artwork that I saw also in Margarita's atelier, and it was also a person with autism, that they had like a specific art graphic. But I think this is something about the mind that I would like to explore. And the most important thing is, it's not about the pattern, but it's about the setting where they can be free, but at the same time, as you mentioned, Sofia, monitored, that they don't feel alone. And this is something, to have a space that you don't feel alone and you can work free. We can say that it's a pattern of the atelier in general, that you can do also with people with personal, with intellectual disabilities, or in prison, or in the refugee camp. And this is something really, really important, I think.
Thank you. So would you, the speakers, or anything else?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, one last question. For example, if we take in notions of religion or culture, in some contexts and in some situations, and obviously in some cases, certain music is not allowed, right? So for example, in Christianity, like if we look at the Mormons, like you can't listen to certain songs, you can't listen to certain music, or even in Islam, I think in some cases it is with certain music that is limited. So when it comes to maybe reaching a broader public in a very culturally maybe sensitive way, and to be as inclusive as possible, what approaches or mentality or mindset would you recommend, or would you maybe think of? Does that make sense?
Probably they didn't have words. They didn't use your words.
Right. But in terms of like, how do I say this? Kind of certain melodies, like for example, even the words are not present in some cases. Are there also situations where there could be a third dimension to certain music?
But you cannot use some specific instruments, for example.
Right. Does that make sense? If it doesn't,
Yeah, I think this question is for Gianni and Lorenzo.
Ok. Se ho capito bene la domanda, diciamo proprio Lorenzo l'ha anticipato un po' prima, il mio lavoro si svolge anche dentro le carceri nel territorio nazionale, e lì la popolazione è assolutamente multietnica e multiculturale. E in questo senso la musica è di grande aiuto, il suonare insieme, magari attraverso le percussioni. E una cosa importante è sapere che non servono competenze musicali specifiche per fare musicoterapia o suonare insieme. Ecco, la musica in questo senso è un grande, diciamo, contenitore, dove l'appartenenza sociale, ideologica si abbatte immediatamente, perché parliamo e comunichiamo con un tipo di linguaggio diverso che è lo stesso per tutti, e di conseguenza dà la possibilità a ognuno di poter esprimere attraverso il suono, attraverso lo strumento, la propria personalità, e essere anche sostenuto dal gruppo. Perciò assolutamente ci sono dei progetti bellissimi, sono stati fino a qualche anno fa in Siria. Ah, ok. Sorry. My translate.
So, Gianni works in prison, and it's a multi-ethnic and multicultural context where Gianni and prisoners play together. And for playing music therapy in a group, there's no need to knows how to play instruments. So music can be a container where ideology and race are hidden, and the only available language is music. So everyone can communicate, and the way the prisoners playing is a mean to show their personality and to receive the support of the members of the group.
Ecco, per aggiungere ancora qualcosa, ci sono stati fino a qualche anno fa, poi interrotti per una situazione, insomma, anche di guerra, dei progetti bellissimi in Libia, nella parte orientale dell'Europa, che servivano proprio diciamo, ad aiutare le persone, anche rifugiati, a sostenere un momento particolare di stress e di esclusione sociale come quello che stavano vivendo. E in questo senso ci sono stati dei colleghi italiani che hanno partecipato a questi incontri utilizzando proprio la musicoterapia.
So there were project, a beautiful project in Libya and East Europe, where music therapists and Italian music therapists helped the population, yes, to sustain the stress. I would like also to add that there is a community music therapy that is an active type of music therapy to help so the promotion of the peace. And there is a study also with post-traumatic stress disorder patients, and so it's a great field and very interesting field.
Thank you for your answer. Yeah, you mentioned percussions and other instruments. So to answer to Elizabeth, music therapy is made up with different instruments and with different kind of music. So it's not just melodies that can be denied by some cultural heritage or so on. So if we have not, in the chat, there's nothing else. So I would like to thank you all again for your interesting and inspiring presentations, and the audience for the participation. I just invite you to stay for the closing remarks of the conference. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.